Quickly with terms of assessment and psychometric assessment, when you're looking at making a hiring decision, that can be very different than if you're looking for development. And you may use the same tool, but you should be using that tool differently. So in terms of making a hiring decision, the key thing is to be objective, and to the earlier point about data and using the right data, it's very much that. It's very much thinking about what are the points I should be making a decision on. If you have a pool of 100 candidates and you have a tool that's giving you 40 points of data on that candidate, that's a lot of information to process as a hiring manager across all those folks, plus the interview, plus the resume, plus everything else. So in order to help you with high volume hiring decisions, the key thing is to identify what are the right data points. Maybe that's an algorithm that can be designed to distill out what's most important. Or maybe that's as simple as just pointing out these are the things that predict success in the role and narrowly focusing on those. Because again, humans have a capacity to how much we can cognitively load, how much we can actually infer about somebody. So we need to narrow that down a bit when it comes to a hiring decision. On the other hand, when it comes to development, developing leaders, trying to see what someone's strengths and weaknesses are, it's important to think here, it's not about comparing others, but within that person, what's their relative strengths and weaknesses. So now that same problem is inverted, where instead of having a lot of information dispersed across 1,000 people, you want to get as much right and valuable information about that one person. And when it comes to looking at it in that sense, identifying strengths and weaknesses, what you might find is a lot of conflicting information that needs to be processed and understood. And that's where a proper HR professional or a proper psychometric tool or a proper person who's done this before can help guide people through. Because you certainly will when you look at, say, moving somebody from a senior manager role to a director or an executive role. A lot of information on that person. Some of it consistent, some of it contradictory. So some tools are better at one thing than another. Take, for example, a psychometric or personality tool. That's giving us things like this person's preferences, work styles. All things being equal, what will they gravitate to? However, other things like an interview or a simulation are going to give you things about this person's learned behaviors. What behaviors can they exhibit? Not necessarily what they like to exhibit. So that's why you might find a lot of contradictory information. But when you look at it that way, you're actually getting a much better holistic view of the candidate. One thing that I often come up against in some of the managerial assessments for development, promotion, identifying high potentials, is we'll give a tool that gives a profile of somebody, their psychometric profile, their personality traits. And that might be at odds with what they might have displayed in the role, or what people think of that person via some interview or some other tool. And it's not because one is right and one is wrong, but because they're getting at two very different things. Consistently across cultures, religions, and
interesting.
Consistent theme. I just want to give this one a bit of thought, because anytime we start talking about different cultures, religions, and cross continents, there's so many different factors to have to consider and balance. A lot of the things we talked about are consistent. So the generational thing I said before, although it can be commingled with some of these cultural factors, is certainly something that comes up consistently and comes up all the time. Another thing that has been very consistent and has come up all the time to the question around how is the knowledge economy changing is the focus on high potentials. So that one person who can have a major shift in your organization. We look at some of the key leaders that everybody aspires to, and those tend to be pretty consistent. You look at the Apples, you look at the Googles, people see these individuals who've done some great innovation, and they want to aspire or try to build that, cultivate that kind of mentality. So we see that across cultures. Try to find something that's a little bit less obvious that I found particularly interesting.